It's finally time to talk about objects in JavaScript. Recall that JavaScript has 8 data types. In this lesson, you will learn about the object data type. All of the other 7 data types are classified as primitive data types. Object is the only non-primitive data type in JavaScript. And while it's grouped with the other data types, what it is really more of a data structure. Rather than a single piece of data like a number or a string, it's a collection of data. We can create an object and put it into a variable with a name, just like any other variable. Then, here's where it gets interesting. We can create variables and functions that belong to that object, and these special variables and functions are called properties and methods, and they can only be used by referring to that object. That's not going to make a lot of sense without seeing an example. Please open your developer console and type along with me. We'll look at an example of an object with just properties first. Let's say that we're writing a game, and we have a monster in the game, let's say a dragon. So we're going to make an object for the dragon. It's going to start out just like we're making a variable declaration. And then we're going to use curly braces to surround what's called the object literal, which is how we create the object. This is similar to how when you create an array, you use square brackets to surround the array items, and that's actually called an array literal. Don't press enter yet. Now, when we write objects, it's common to put everything on separate lines like this. This kind of looks like a code block, like an if block or a function block, but it is not. Each line does not contain a statement, and they're not ended with a semicolon. We are defining the properties that belong to this dragon by using a property name, then a colon, then the property value. Then we're separating each of these property definitions with a comma. Outside of an object, when you create a variable, you use an equal sign as the assignment operator. When you create an object property, you use a colon. Remember that, it's a common mistake to forget that and use the equal sign here. So now that we have created this dragon, we can type the variable name that we used for the object into the console, and the console will show us what's inside it. We can query the properties that belong to it by using dot notation. And the way that we can do that is by typing the name of the object, then a dot, then the property name. There's a second way that you can get to a property, which is by using bracket notation instead of dot notation. But typically, it's longer to type and dot notation is preferable. There are cases when bracket notation is useful, but we won't discuss that right now. And notice that if you just try to get a property without first giving it the object name, it won't work. That property is attached to the object. That's what makes it a property and not a variable. I hope that you can already see how useful an object can be. You can bundle a lot of related data together into a single object. You learned before that arrays are a special type of object. Arrays are not as flexible as objects. They can have items, just as objects can have properties, but the array items are always accessed by a numeric index like this. Whereas for objects, the properties are accessed by the property names, which are configured by you to whatever you want them to be. Another way that objects are more flexible is that you can add custom methods to objects. Remember, arrays have methods like arrayJoin, arrayPop. These are predefined methods in the JavaScript language that are already written for you, and you can use them on any array. However, with objects, you can add your own custom method. For example, let's say that every time I wrote dragon.roar and an empty parameter list, I wanted to see the message, "The dragon roars ferociously." Here's how we can do this. Let's make a new dragon. This one's going to be a blue dragon. I'm going to use a method name, followed by a parameter list, which in this case is empty, then curly braces, and the method body inside the curly braces. And now I can call this method just like this. Now, this is a shorthand syntax for creating a method that was added to JavaScript in ES6. Before ES6, you would have had to write it with the anonymous function expression syntax, like this. And I can call this method in the same way. These two ways are equivalent, and while I encourage you to use the shorthand, you will still run into plenty of code that uses this old way, so it's worth knowing about it. Also, you will need to know it in order to add or update a method of an existing object. Which brings us to our next topic, how to add and update properties and methods to an existing object. Let's say we want to add an element property to our Dragon1 object. Let's say we want this dragon to be a fire dragon, so we can write dragon1.element equals fire. And here, notice that we did use an equal sign, the assignment operator, and not a colon, because we only use the colon when we're writing the object literal inside curly braces. Outside of that, we must use the assignment operator. So, if you want to add a property to an existing object, just use the object's variable name, then add the property name that you want to use, and assign a value to it just like any other variable. And you can update the existing properties in the same way. Let's update the color property. And now, if we look at our Dragon1 object, we can see that the color has changed. Next, let's look at adding or updating a method for an object. To add or update an already existing method, you will use the function expression syntax like this. Let's test that out and have our Dragon1 attack. And if we type the object name into the console, we can see that the method is inside it. If we want to update an existing method, we can just override it like this. Okay, let's stop for a minute. I know what you're thinking. This doesn't make any sense. These are constants. You thought we could never change constants after declaring them the first time. How are we changing these properties and methods? For now, what you need to know is that even if an object variable is declared using the constant keyword, the properties and methods can indeed be changed. But the variable itself can never be reassigned. For example, try this and see what happens. Right, you can't do it. You cannot reassign the entire object. However, it's totally fine to update the properties and values. And that's actually true of arrays as well. If I have a constant array like this, I cannot reassign the whole array. However, it's completely fine to change an item in the array like this. Okay, I just have one more topic I want to cover in this lesson. Let's look at using parameters and methods. You can use parameters and methods just like you do in functions. Let's revisit Dragon 2. Just for practice adding properties, we'll give it an element property as well and make it a water dragon. Now let's give it the ability to swim. And let's make it so that we can pass in the direction that it swims to. Now you can call this method like this, passing an argument into the parameter list. And you can see how that works. We will stop here. You've learned what objects are, the meaning of object properties and methods, how to create and update objects and their properties and methods, and how to access those properties and call those methods. And you got a bonus lesson on how the const variable declaration keyword works with objects and arrays. Objects are a complex topic, and of course there's a lot more to objects, but now you've begun to get to know them. Note that objects are a common data structure in programming, and the concept of an object is not unique to JavaScript. It's part of an entire programming paradigm known as object-oriented programming.